Thank you. Am I on? Yes, I am. Great, okay. So as you'll know by now, our theme for this series is Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana, the way of the diamond thunderbolt. And we're not looking at this because it's possible for us to actually practice Tantra as it was originally seen, but in its original form. But there are aspects that we can learn from and apply in our practice right here and now, which can be very valuable. So we're calling this series Tantra Now, not Tantra way back then. And I'm going to use the term Vajrayana, I think, rather than Tantra, because Tantra is a bit ambivalent. It gets applied to things that aren't Buddhist, and it gets applied to things that aren't even particularly spiritual. So I'm going to try and remember to say Vajrayana, the way of the diamond thunderbolt. And one of the main things about the Vajrayana is that it focuses on energy. It focuses on energy. It finds ways to mobilize our energies and get them behind our Dharma life. So it's not good enough. It's not enough to just understand the Dharma really well, to be good, to be well-intentioned. That's not going to get us anywhere if we want really serious change. I just happened to be in the library when I was sort of looking at this talk, and I picked up a book actually on Zen, and it said, it is not enough to understand the logic of the teachings that will not disperse the black clouds in your mind. You need to throw your whole life into practice. So yeah, that's coming from a completely different tradition, but it's saying you have to throw your whole life into practice. You have to get all your energies behind your practice, not just the nice ones, not just the sort of top 2 inches of the head. So we need to find ways to get our full energies behind our practice now, just as much as people did 1,500 years ago in India. And one of the ways that Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana, one of the ways that Vajrayana stirs up energy is by tapping into the strongest experiences of life. The experiences that stir our very deepest energies, that get our whole being stimulated. So tonight I'm going to talk about one of these experiences and how that can be used and harnessed for the spiritual life, and that is the experience of falling in love. So I'm going to talk about how the energy that's released by that common, universal human experience of falling in love, how that can be turned to our spiritual benefit. And as well as hearing that Vajrayana is about energy, we've also heard that it evolved as a sort of fusion between the Dharma and magic, village magic, shamanism. Techniques derived from magic and shamanism, which were usually used to achieve outer worldly goals, like making it rain or something like that, were instead applied to achieve inner spiritual goals. So magic often uses what we call spells, which are sort of rituals, rites, which are aimed at stirring up really deep energies, so that our mind is sort of energized, high voltage, and then focusing our mind, focusing our intention on bringing something about, bringing some, in magic, usually worldly end about, like making it rain or making an enemy ill or something like that. So the problem is that it seems really doubtful that raising up our energies and then focusing our mind on bringing something about is actually going to make any difference to the outer world. You know, is it going to make it rain, or is it going to stop Brexit, or whatever? Because our inner state of mind is not one of the conditions that influences whether it rains or what happens in the election. But some magic, I assume, doesn't work. But when it comes to inner change, when it comes to inner progress, well, in that case, our inner state of mind is precisely one of the conditions that matters. It's the main condition. So yeah, it's probably by far the most powerful condition that influences whether we can break through the barriers that limit us, so that we can change and grow. So while it seems very unlikely that ordinary magic actually works, it seems pretty certain that using magical techniques to generate energy and concentration can work when it comes to propelling us towards enlightenment, propelling us to spiritual progress. So, okay, Vajrayana uses techniques, rites, etc., derived from magic and shamanism to achieve spiritual goals. And we can identify at least four main types of magic, four main types of spells or rites that are used in magic. So these are the ones we can think of: the rite of destruction, which you use to destroy your enemies. The rite of pacification, used to pacify harmful forces. The rite of increase, used for things like making the crops flourish, making your business grow, making loads of money. And finally, the rite of fascination. The rite of fascination, used to fascinate and attract people, to make people fall in love. So each of these rites has got its counterpart in Vajrayana Buddhism. We have in Vajrayana Buddhism the rite of destruction, the rite of pacification, the rite of increase, and the rite of fascination. And because I'm talking about falling in love tonight, I'm going to talk about how we can use the rite of fascination. How we can use the rite of fascination and the magic associated with falling in love to move us towards enlightenment. So the rite of fascination, I mean, if we're talking about ordinary magic, it would be mainly about casting spells to make people fall in love. So the magician or magicianess might be casting a spell to make somebody fall in love with them, attract them. To make somebody fall in love with them so that they can have a relationship with them. Or someone might come to a magician and ask them to say, well, I'll give you some dosh if you'll make that person who seems to ignore me, but I really fancy, fall in love with me. And they would come up with a rite, some ritual that had to be gone through to maybe create a love potion in certain ways which would attract this person. Ritual and how it should be used. So what goes on in the rite of fascination, and how can we use that to put energy into our spiritual life? So yeah, as I said, Vajrayana turns those techniques into ways to achieve spiritual goals. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, how we can use the rite of fascination in our spiritual life. Because when we fall in love, I don't know if I think I can just about remember. That doesn't say I don't love. Falling in love is different from loving, but anyway. When we fall in love, the object of our mind is always in our mind. We're obsessed, we're always thinking about them, always finding ways to be with them or near them. Everything about them sort of fascinates them. If we hear their name, it's like... and we feel energized and alive, and our world seems brighter and beautiful, and all the usual grey dullness is sort of driven away. And it's easy to see, I think, that if we could feel like that about the spiritual ideal we want to move towards, our progress would be swift and sure. We would always have the goal of living up to our potential in our mind. We would be fascinated by the Dharma and everything associated with it. Always wanting to spend time with what brings us closer to our beloved, the potential that we could achieve. Always wanting to spend time with the sangha, meditating, hearing the Dharma, reading the Dharma. All our energies would be focused on getting more and more closer to the person that we could be in the way that we want to become close to our beloved. So that we would quickly close the gap between where we are now, the person we are now, and the person that we could become. That magnificent person that we could become in the future, that we're in love with. So in Tantra, we don't so much use this rite of fascination to make others fall in love with us. We use it to make ourselves fall in love with the ideal. To fall in love with the enlightened mind, to fall in love with reality, with the bodhicitta, and the magnificent person that we've got the potential to become, which are all aspects of the same thing. So how can we use the rite of fascination on ourselves, make ourselves more in love with the ideal? Or to put it another way, I hope I can get this across, how can we cooperate with the rite of fascination that reality is using on us? Because reality, the enlightened mind, the person we could become, the bodhicitta, however you want to see it, is always seeking to attract us towards it. It's casting a spell on us. It's fascinating us. That's why you're here. That's why you're here. It's using the rite of fascination to attract us towards it. And I'll say a bit more about that later, but I think we experience that rite of fascination being worked on us as what we call sraddha in Buddhism. I'll talk a bit more about that later. So the future wiser self we could become, for example, is always trying to attract us towards it, showing us the way towards what we could be. And sometimes we resist that temptation. And very often we sort of ignore it, or we don't even recognize that it's going on, we don't notice it, we allow it to be drowned out by the attraction of all those other fascinating things that there are in the world, all those worldly things, etc. Goals and pleasure. So those are two sides to the same coin. How can we use the rite of fascination on ourselves to fall in love more with the enlightened mind, and how can we cooperate with the rite of fascination that's being used on us by reality? The fascination that is trying to attract us towards becoming the enlightened person we could be. So to explore those questions, it's really helpful to ask, when we fall in love, what do we fall in love with? What do we really fall in love with? I think there are two things that we really fall in love with. Firstly, we fall in love with beauty in one of its many, many different forms. That might be physical beauty in one of its many, many forms. It may be partly that we fall in love with inner beauty, if you like, beauty of character. But let's not pretend that we are angelic beings divorced from the realm of matter because appearance has got something to do with it. The physical has got something to do with it. Let's pretend we're just beautiful souls and not interested in attractive bodies, because that wouldn't be true, actually. Part of falling in love is about physical attraction. So that's the first aspect. We fall in love with beauty. And then the second, I think, is that we fall in love with qualities that we see in another, which, as far as we're concerned, we lack in ourselves. So I will talk about both of those. I'll talk about attraction to beauty and attraction to something that we see in another that we don't perceive in ourselves. So the faculty, we have a sort of faculty for experiencing beauty, which is neither the intellect purely nor the heart purely. It's something like a mixture of the two. So the faculty by which we perceive beauty in the outer world is very, very closely related to the faculty that we call sraddha, which I already sort of talked about. The faculty that allows us to perceive and respond to spiritual beauty, if you like. So sraddha is often translated as either faith or confidence, but that is just, neither of those is right. Neither of those is right. Sangha describes Shraddha as the response of what's ultimate in us to what's ultimate in the universe. It's a sort of, there's a bit of it in us and it's responding to something ultimate in the universe. He also says that the root of the word Shraddha, I can't comment on this, but he says the root of the word Shraddha comes from something to do with the verb to place your heart upon. It's got something to do. So Shraddha is what our heart is placed upon. And it's us responding, something ultimate in us responding to something ultimate in the universe. So we could call Shraddha a sort of heart knowledge. It's a sort of heart knowledge, a way of knowing that combines the heart and the head into a new and more inclusive faculty. Neither of those is enough for knowing spiritual truths on their own. It's a way of knowing spiritual beauty, it's a way of knowing spiritual truth, an intuitive way of knowing spiritual beauty and spiritual truth. We just feel it. Sometimes we can feel it in our bodies almost. So I think another way we could think about Shraddha is that it's the person we could become, the wonderful, marvelous being we could become, calling us, attracting us towards them, saying, this way, no, not that way, not that way. And making us fascinated by the things that are going to move us in the right direction. Everything that could help us comes to seem really fascinating. And you might have experienced that because for some reason you're here. And I bet you found aspects of the Dharma really fascinating, and that's why we're here. So we all experience that fascination that's attracted us to the Dharma. Our Shraddha pulls us towards what we could become, just as a love of beauty pulls us towards the person that we love or towards what is beautiful. And we often feel Shraddha as a sort of deep felt sense of what is right for us, the right direction for us to take, an intuitive heart knowledge about the direction our life needs to take. And as I said, that faculty of Shraddha is very, very closely connected to the way we experience beauty. And because of that, our capacity to perceive and respond to beauty is really closely related to our capacity for Shraddha. So we can develop our capacity to experience beauty, and when we do that, we also develop our capacity for Shraddha, our capacity to be drawn towards the ideal. So to practice the rite of fascination on ourselves, one way is to strengthen our association with beauty, to strengthen, and that also strengthens our Shraddha. So how can we do that? How can we develop our capacity to experience beauty? Well, I think one way is simply to meditate, actually. One way is simply to meditate. I don't know if you've noticed, but if we meditate regularly, the world looks more beautiful. It does to me, anyway. I know a lot of other people say it does. So we can start to see beauty everywhere, especially if we do quite a lot of meditation. And part of that maybe is just that we learn to pay attention. You know, how often do you see people walking out in the country and are they paying attention? No, they're going about this and that and the other and all the little details, and they're just not seeing it. They're just not seeing it. If we don't pay attention, we won't see beauty. We learn to pay attention in meditation. But I think it goes beyond that. So I hope I've got these right. In the words of the poet William Blake, if the doors of perception were cleansed, all things would be seen as they are, infinite, something like that. The doors of perception then gets rather applied to sort of taking peyote, but never mind. What he meant originally was just if we could see things more as they are, we would see them as infinite, we would see them as beautiful and infinite. If the doors of perception were cleansed, the doors of our perception are normally very dirty by all of our sort of obsessions and worries and anxiety, all the thoughts that go on in our head, all our prapancha, as we call it. And meditation cleanses the doors of the senses so that our senses are enhanced and the world looks brighter and feels and sounds looks, feels, and sounds more beautiful. Our experience of nature, our experience of art, our experience of music becomes deeper. So that's one thing we can do, meditate. Another thing we can do, of course, is to spend time in beautiful situations, to spend time in nature, and again, to pay attention to what we see and hear and feel, using some of the mental discipline that we get from meditation. Another thing we can do is expose ourselves to refined, beautiful art of all kinds, and develop our appreciation for it, which takes some effort, takes some cultivation. So we can go to art galleries and really look at the works, really give them some time, really look at them. We can try going to classical concerts, even if it's not something we would normally do, and really listen, really listen. We could visit beautiful architecture, for example, like our cathedrals and some of our churches. They're astonishing works of art, and they communicate something spiritual. So we could allow ourselves to respond to that environment that they create, these amazing works of art, huge works of art. And then as we develop our capacity to perceive and connect with beauty, we can learn to relate to it as a glimmer of something even more beautiful that lies beyond our sensory experience. The beauty of reality, the beauty of the transcendental, the beauty of the bodhicitta. Because when we experience beauty out there in the world, in the physical world, or in high art, or in another person, it's as though we're seeing a glimmer of something beyond our normal experience, shining through. Shining imperfectly through the material world. When we marvel at the sunsets, when we're absolutely enthralled by a piece of music, entranced by a beautiful person, we're seeing a glimmer of the transcendental. So just recapping a bit, we can develop our capacity for sraddha by developing our capacity to experience beauty in all those ways. But we can also develop our sraddha more directly. And it helps, and a lot of our spiritual practice is aimed at that. So it helps to ask ourselves, what is it that helps me feel inspired and fascinated by the Dharma? What is it that helps me feel fascinated and inspired? I could say for myself, for example, that meditation helps. If I meditate regularly, the ideal seems much more alive and attractive to me. Materialist explanations of reality seem a bit stupid and superficial. The world seems very mysterious. If I let go of meditation, I can lose contact with my fascination for the Buddha and Dharma and Sangha. And other more worldly things start to look more interesting. So meditation helps, certainly in my case. In my case, contact with the Dharma helps. Dharma study really helps. It keeps me in contact with that something that fascinates me. Contact with the Sangha helps. Friendship helps. Being in this place, just being in this place helps. So we could all ask, what helps me to feel fascinated and inspired by the Dharma? What helps me to experience sraddha? And really make that the goal of our practice. Whatever it is, it's the way, whatever it is that fascinates us, that is the way, that is reality practicing the rite of fascination upon us and drawing us towards what we could become. And if we want to make progress, we need to pay attention to that and respond. And we need to do more of whatever it is that puts us in contact with that, whether it be meditation, as I've said, Dharma study, Sangha contact, whatever it is for you. It's worth asking, what is it? And then doing it. So yeah, as we develop our sraddha, as we fall more and more in love with the ideal, as we respond to the rite of fascination that reality is doing to draw us towards it. The other thing I think we need to do is to learn to trust it, to learn to trust that, because it's not something you can sort of put it in a box and say, there it is. It's not, you can't say, well, 2 and 2 makes 4, therefore I'm fascinated by the Dharma. It's a quite intangible sort of intuitive felt sense of direction. And we need to pay attention to that if we want it to work for us. We need to learn to trust it as a guide. And allow it to guide our life decisions. Give it weight. Give it weight. That's something that's a bit intangible, but we need to give it weight compared to some more obvious things like prudence, staying safe, common sense, and other people's opinions. We don't care about any of them when we're in love. Do we? I mean, so we need, if we're in love with the Dharma, we wouldn't care about those things. So I said earlier that when we fall in love with another person, there are 2 things we fall in love with. There are 2 things we really fall in love with. One is beauty in all its forms, and the other is that we fall in love with qualities that we see in the other that we seem to lack. We might think, oh, that person is so sort of graceful and refined when we feel a bit coarse. Or we might feel that that person is so robust and adventurous when we feel a bit sort of vulnerable and timid. And we see that other side in them. It could be all sorts of other qualities that we see in the other person. And this is a phenomenon that Jungian psychologists, I think, call projection, okay? So it's something that we don't acknowledge in ourselves, or that we don't admit to in ourselves, or we don't know is going off in ourselves, which we then sort of project and we see on another person. And we can then hate that other person for it, or we can love that other person for it, depending on whether it's a positive or a negative quality. And what the trouble with that when we fall in love with another person is that, well, there's several problems. One problem might be that the other person doesn't really have that quality at all. It's just pure projection. It's just pure projection on our part. So we see an aspect of ourselves that we don't acknowledge in them. Another thing that may happen, that may be the case, is that they may have some of that quality, but not all the time. So, okay, they may be robust some of the time, but they may also have loads of sort of slightly neurotic anxieties and feel vulnerable some of the time. They may seem wise, and then they act really stupid some of the time, and so on. Or they just may have some of those qualities, but they still may not be the wonderful person we thought they were. They are like that, but they're also really annoying in this host of other ways. And when we realize that, when we realize they either don't have that quality, or they've only got a bit of that quality, or they have got that quality, but they're still really annoying, that's when we fall out of love. That's when we fall out of love. And if we're in sync with the modern romantic idea, we may then think, well, I have to find another person I'm in love with. And then we can do that over and over again, because we'll never find them. Because what we're in love with is an ideal. What we're in love with is an archetype. What we're in love with is part of ourselves that could be developed. And even if the person really were to be quite a nice person and have the quality that we thought they had, what happens all too often in a relationship is that we let that person do what they're good at, and we carry on doing just what we're good at. So we may do the sort of practical stuff and let them have the emotional intelligence, or vice versa. We may do the abstract thinking and let them do the feeling. We may let them do the practical stuff and we do the other bit, whatever. So what happens is that between us, we then add up to a pretty decent, complete person. But we never become a complete person ourselves. We never become the person that we could be. So, in a way, those don't work. Those don't really work. That sort of falling in love, it's a bit of a sort of trick, really. But it's really powerful. And the Vajrayana uses that human tendency to project qualities that we feel we lack onto another, uses that so that we can it uses that in its meditation techniques. It uses that in its meditation techniques. So a few weeks ago, I talked about what is sometimes called yidam practice in Vajrayana Buddhism, in which we have a particular archetypal figure that we meditate on and form a relationship with. And in that sort of practice, we can project our own undeveloped qualities onto our yidam. And then by meditating on them and forming a relationship with them and even falling a bit in love with them, we absorb those qualities back into ourselves, those qualities which were there all the time in potential, but which we didn't actually experience. So we discover those qualities in ourselves. So we could project our hidden wisdom onto Manjughosha, our unacknowledged wisdom onto Manjughosha, our unacknowledged metta and compassion onto Avalokiteshvara, our hidden strength onto Vajrapani, surrounded in flames. And then by falling a bit in love with that figure and meditating on them, we gradually find that quality in ourselves. And Vajrayana Buddhism is not, if you want to stir up deep energies, you can't be puritanical. And Vajrayana Buddhism is not puritanical about how it helps us to fall in love in that way with these figures. So, for example, I'm told that the most common yidam practice, most common visualization practice among Tibetan monks, celibate Tibetan monks, was green Tara, who is over there. And green Tara is visualized as a really beautiful, mainly naked young woman. And who, it was said, did not mind in the least if her devotees found her sexually attractive, because that's part of falling in love. And what she wants is for us to fall in love with enlightenment in her shape. All the better, all the more likely that these deep energies of falling in love would be aroused. And all Tara cares about is that. And I'm sure it also works the other way around with female practitioners. Might fall in love with the beautiful, handsome crown prince of wisdom, Manjughosha. Or if you fancy something a bit different, you might fall in love with Padmasambhava with his sort of royal air and his rather swashbuckling, piratical manner and his long, glossy blue-back hair. I don't know. I mean, I'm a guy, you know. Okay. Unless you're an order member, you won't have a full-blown sadhana practice of visualization and meditation on one of these figures. So to help us fall in love with the full person we could become, we could ask ourselves, well, what Buddhist figure could I fall in love with? Or what Buddhist figure fascinates me? Is there one that fascinates me? It could be even something as apparently superficial as, is there one who I like the color of? Or, well, the mantra really moves me. So find a figure that fascinates us a bit and then find out about it. Find out a bit more about it. What's their mantra? What does their seed syllable look like? Maybe paint it out. Chant their mantra. Cultivate a relationship with them. And let our fascination for them grow. And then, as we do that, absorb some of their qualities into ourselves. So that's a bit about the second of those aspects, that when we fall in love, what we're often doing is falling in love with qualities that we see in another, which we have got the potential to have, but we're not expressing at the moment. And Vajrayana Buddhism can help us to use that by using these yidam practices, by allowing us to project it outwards onto something that we can fall in love with and then absorb into ourselves. So just to recap, okay, so how do we practice the rite of fascination on ourselves, fall in love with the ideal? How do we cooperate with the rite of fascination that reality is doing on us? So what I said was, firstly, let's nurture our capacity to experience beauty and expose ourselves to beauty in all its forms. Make that a practice. That's part of our spiritual practice, to nurture our capacity to experience beauty. That includes, obviously, spiritual things like meditating, because that really does, but it also includes things that maybe in some styles of spiritual practice wouldn't be seen as spiritual at all. Really cultivating our experience of the arts, for example, and music and so on, and architecture. And having cultivated our experience of beauty, to see that beauty that we see or feel or hear in the world as a glimmer of something beyond, a glimmer of the transcendental. And then also to ask ourselves, so that doing those things will help us to experience sraddha, that rite of fascination that reality is subjecting us to. And asking ourselves, well, what increases my sraddha? What do I do that increases my sraddha? And what is there about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha that absolutely fascinates me? And how can I really cultivate that fascination? And then, having cultivated sraddha, learn to trust our sraddha. Learn to trust sraddha as a valid guide to the way we live our life, giving it more weight than some commonsensical stuff that we usually think of as, which has been described as the inherited stupidity of the race, which just keeps us doing what everybody always does. And then finally, see if we can find an archetypal figure that fascinates us, that we can fall in love with, so that we can develop the qualities that we see in them in ourselves. And if we do all those things, the rite of fascination can pull us very quickly towards the wiser, warmer, more creative person that we could become, that we've got the potential to be.